Welcome to this DaVinci Resolve Fusion node breakdown. Today's nodes are the Planar Tracker and the Planar Transform nodes. So we're going to jump into Fusion and bring in a Planar Tracker. Now, unlike the Tracker node, which uses point trackers that we used the other day, the Planar Tracker tracks a plane. And there's a few ways to do this, but we'll jump in and I'll start going over everything. So up top, we have multiple operations. And what this node allows you to do is first track, which would be our primary operation. And then once you track, you can use steady, corner pin, or stabilize. And I'll go over examples of each of these. Now, unlike the point tracker, the planar tracker requires a reference time. And this is just a reference frame. So wherever in your footage you want to use as your reference frame, usually your best frame showing what you're trying to track, that's what you use as your reference frame. But I'm going to go ahead and just hit set on this first one. Now, this pattern up here is just dictating our actual pattern which we put in our trackers. So I'm going to lower this for right now. Now, under our tracker, we have two options. We have point and we have hybrid point. Now, under the point, what you would do is click and select what you want to track, and it's going to give us 4 points to track our plane. And what this tracker is doing, it's kind of treating this whole area like our tracker node where we had the center thing we're moving around and it's picking up patterns within, but it's not picking up this entire box as a pattern. It's just picking up what it thinks is the pattern it wants to track. Now, within our motion type, this dictates what we're going to track, and it's cumulative. So if we're only tracking translation, which is our X and Y, we would use that. If we're tracking translation and rotation, meaning X, Y, and it's rotating a little bit, we can track translation, rotation, and scale, meaning it's moving on our X and Y, rotating a little bit, and possibly zooming in and out. We have affine, which uses our translation, rotation, scale, plus our shear, which means if our rectangle is shearing at all or moving, we would want to use affine. And perspective includes all of the above, the translation, rotation, scale, shear, and perspective. That means if this sign was turning in perspective, like away from the camera, it would track that as well. So this footage really, I would say we could get away with using affine for this specific footage. And you want to use the least. So if you're only tracking translation, which is your X and Y, don't use perspective because it's going to be looking for that perspective to actually track. And you would get a better track with translation. Same with if you only had translation rotation, don't use perspective, use translation rotation. And sometimes you have to bounce back and forth to see which ones you get a better track with, because sometimes your tracks just don't track well. But we're going to select affine. Now your output is just kind of what this tracker is going to be using to track. And that's in combination with your track channel. So right now we've got background, which is our background image. And if I hit background pre-processed, this means it's going to pre-process the footage based off what channel we pick. So if I pick red, it's going to show our red channel. If I pick green, our green channel, our blue channel, Luma, and custom. And under your custom, you can adjust the weight of your different colors. And this just helps your track out. So every piece of footage is different. There's not one way to do it, but I'm just going to go ahead and leave this on Luma for right now. And I do not know why my timeline is doing this. It should not be going to the timeline as I mouse over it, but it is for some reason. And I think that's something to do with the tracker node. No, it's doing it on all of them. Anyway, back to the tracker node. If we want to output a mask, it'll output a mask of that channel. And we can do mask over background. So I'm going to leave this on background. And down here we have our tracking buttons. So we can track in reverse, stop our tracking, track forward, track back one frame, track to the next one frame. And our trimming, once we start tracking and we have data down here, we can trim all this. Like, it basically gets rid of all your tracks from the point of your playhead to the front. So if you have a bad track, this one will delete the tracks altogether, and this one will delete the tracks from your playhead to the end. And right here we have show splines in editor, which is our little spline data down here. And our create planar transform, we will get into that when we have to create our planar transform data. So let's go ahead and track this. And for some reason my track data is no longer there. So let's go ahead and refresh this. And this is one thing with this planar tracker node. I find it's kind of quirky at times. And I also find that, say I create a planar track. So I go in here and create my point tracks. Now, sometimes if I was to not finish and I'm done for the day and I just created that and I save my project and I come back the next day, these point tracks are flattened. Or even if I track, so let's go ahead and track forward, and that's a horrible track. If I save and come back, I can no longer manipulate my points. So just watch that, and if I were you, any tracking you're doing, I would go ahead and make sure you finish and get all that tracking done and get your tracking data before you save and shut down for the day. So back to the track. So you can see this point track just didn't have a very good track at all. And we can go ahead and delete everything. Let's go back to the beginning. And let's fix our points. And let's see if we change our channel, if we get a better one, because it did look like blue had a little more information in it. So let's change our track channel to blue, and let's track forward. And that did give us a little better track. And you want to watch, because if you mouse through here, it looks like your track is slipping, but it actually isn't. It's just taking a little long for that little display to catch up with your footage, but that's still not a very good track. Now here you can see we've got our little lines. If we go to options right here, we can darken the image. We can show our track markers, which are the little track markers that are showing up there. And we can show or hide our trails. In addition, we can change our trail length. And down here, we can change our colors. So if we want our track colors to be purple, we can make them purple. If we want our outline to be blue, we can make it blue. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and refresh this node, and we're going to move to the next tracker type. So our next tracker type is hybrid point slash area. And what this one is doing, if I go ahead and create my track area, it's actually treating this whole area as the pattern. So it's going to track everything within here and give you a lot more points to track, and it's going to be a better track. So we're going to change our motion type back to affine, and we're going to leave our background, and let's go ahead and do blue again. So we got to make sure we set our reference frame, and I didn't want that frame as a reference frame, so I can go ahead and set that as our reference frame. Let's redo our little point pattern here. And let's track forward. So you can see that just gave us a much better track. So it just depends on your footage, and it depends on what you're trying to achieve, whether you're going to use the point or the hybrid point or area. I find the hybrid point slash area always works better. So we've got our track in. Now, before I move on to our actual operation modes, on our node itself, we have 4 inputs. And we have our media in, which is going into our background. We have our effects mask, if we want to mask off where we're tracking. We have this green input, which is kind of like our foreground input from our other tracker nodes. So any images or info you're bringing in to be attached to this tracker. And this white node right here is an occlusion node, meaning in theory, what it's going to do is if we have something occluding, it's going to take this data out. But let's go ahead and make a fake signpost that's traveling in front of our footage. So let's go ahead and make a little fake occlusion area. So I'm going to bring in a background, a rectangle. Let's get a rectangle in there and resize it to turn it into a little post. And let's go ahead and animate it going across our background. And we'll bring in a merge so we can see it. So now we've got our post going across the front. So what you would do is you would make a mask of your posts. So we're going to fake this here, bring in a bitmap. And I'm going to bring it in. And there we go. We've got our little bitmap alpha of our post. And I'm going to bring this into the occlusion. So in theory, as this post crosses, our track is supposed to ignore this while it's tracking our info in the back. But let's go ahead and see if that works. So we're going to refresh our track, set our reference frame, and let's make our little track area here. And we'll bring it back to that blue because that worked nicely. And let's track forward. And you can see it's going crazy. So that's why I said, in theory, that's what this input is supposed to do. This white input is supposed to apply that occlusion to your track and not interfere with your track. But I find it often does not work at all. So moving on, let's go ahead and refresh our track and get rid of all this stuff that doesn't quite work well. And we're going to refresh, set, and we're going to get our track back. And that's close enough for this. And let's go ahead and set our affine, our blue. Let's track forward. And for some reason, my track just stopped. And like I said, this node is finicky. So there's no reason for that to stop, but it stopped. So let's see if we can track forward. And we can't. So let's go ahead and delete all of our tracking data. Let's bring it back. And let's try tracking forward again. And again, for some reason, it stopped. And let's get rid of our merge, see if that helps us out. Troubleshooting here on the fly. Set. Track. And nope, it wants to keep stopping there. So let's go ahead and get us a nice fresh tracker. And like I said, these are the issues I have with this planar tracker quite a bit. And so you're seeing firsthand the problems you're going to have that you have to work through. So let's go back to hybrid point, fine, blue. Let's get our track area. And let's track forward. There we go. Now she worked. All right. So we've got our track. Now our operation modes up here, we have steady, corner pin, and stabilize. What steady is going to do, steady is going to flatten out this image and steady it around our track. That way, if we have to do any paint modes, if we have to do any touch-ups, we'll have a nice flat image. So if I go ahead and hit steady and I play it back, you can see our image is flattened around there. So anything we had to do, we can come in here and do it. So say we needed to add text to this, and even though you could do this other ways, but this is the same principle if, say, this was a track of a person or a wall that had a blemish on it and you had to use the paint node to paint out something. It's nice and flat and not moving, so you can come in here and paint every single frame without having to chase around what you're trying to paint. But we can come in here and say for sale, let's bring in a merge. Let's look at our text that's going on here. So we're just going to pop it there for right now. But then what we could do is we can go to our tracker node and go back to our track, and we can hit create planar transform, and it just made a planar transform node. And this planar transform node has nothing special. You have a checkbox for scaling your source or scale to source. Basically, it's going to keep your scale of your source media and your clipping modes, whether it's your domain of definition or the frame, if your frame's different. So all we have to do is input this in after our text. And if we play, now our text is following around. And we could probably come in here and move our text so it's kind of sideways. But now we've got our text following our track. So let's go ahead and delete this and go back to our tracker node. Now for your corner pin positioning, if we select corner pin and we grab some other media, so let's go ahead and grab our little artwork from the other day and we input it into our foreground. All we have to do is move this to where we want it. And up here, we have merge mode, just like our other ones. We can have background only, foreground over background, or background over foreground. And your clipping mode is whether it's your domain of definition or your frame. And your corner pin data, don't get confused because it just says corner pin 1. You actually have 4 pins on that. So your top left, top right, bottom left, and bottom right. And under your modes, right here, you can enable it or disable it. You can show the grid of it, so you can make sure it's following and tracking correctly. And your apply modes, you have all your typical apply modes. You have all your typical operator modes, subtractive attitude. You have your alpha gain, your burn-in, and your reference time positions are just those keyframes for all those top left, top right, all your individual corners on that image. So now that is following your corner pin. And disregard this box going around. Like I said, this node is a little glitchy. It's going to do odd things. So even if we go in here, sometimes it'll go away, sometimes it won't. So just be patient with this node. So that is using your corner pin. Now, alternatively, if we went to track, let's go ahead and delete this. We can go to our track and let's create our planar transform again. We can bring in a merge node. We can bring in our artwork again. We could use this planar transform and input our artwork. And you can see that's moving. Now, in order to make our corner pins be applied, if you remember, we had the corner positioner. So if we take this corner positioner and input it after our media, we can reposition our corners of our media. And now we have that following. So there's a few ways to do that. So it just depends on what you're trying to achieve. So let's go ahead and delete that. Now for our stabilize, I'm going to go ahead and go to our footage we used the other day. So we have this footage right here that we used our tracker to stabilize this footage, but you can use the planar tracker as well to stabilize. So let's go ahead and add a planar tracker. And we're going to go on frame 1 and set. We're going to hybrid point area. We're going to use translation and rotation only for this. And we can check our channels to see by putting that to background pre-processed, and we can look at our different channels. And it looks like our blue channel is going to be the best one again. So let's go ahead and create a little area to track here. And track forward. So looks like we have a fairly decent track. Now, once we have that, we can go to stabilize, and it's going to give us options for what we want to smooth. So we want our X and Y to be stabilized. We want our rotation. We'll go ahead and uncheck scale because we really don't have any zooming. Under our smoothing window, this is just how it's going to smooth out your footage as it changes it and warps it. And you have box and Gaussian. and they're about the same. Gaussian's a little smoother than box, but we'll leave it on box. Your smoothing radius is how far ahead and in between frames your stabilization node is going to look to see where that's supposed to be. So for example, if this was part of our little pattern track, it's going to look 30 frames ahead to see where that is, to say, okay, I need to smooth it from this location to this location without moving the entire footage. So that's what it is. The more frames you get, the smoother it's going to be, but the harder it's going to be on your computer. So we'll go ahead and leave this on 30, and we're going to hit compute stabilization. And it just let us know that the following frames were stabilized, 0 to 138, which is our entire footage. We can hit OK, and let's play it back and see what we get. So you can see we got a pretty decent stabilization there. And I wouldn't say it's better or worse than what we did on the point tracker, but it was definitely faster. In addition to that being faster, if you notice, we have our footage going off frame here. And if you remember, in the point mode, we had different ways to fix that. The planar tracker, what it does is it allows you to, one, select your clipping mode, whether it's your domain of definition or your frame. We're going to leave it on domain of definition. And then your frame mode is how it's going to fix these issues. So if we have it on full, it's going to use the full frame, but you can see we have really no options to fix anything. It's just going to show what it is on the full frame. If we go to crop, we have options to crop our footage. So we can offset it on the X and Y axis. We can scale it up or down, or we can hit this auto crop, and it's going to look at the entire footage to see how it needs to crop to keep those transparent areas out. So now if we play back, it fit our footage, so all those transparent areas are gone. And same with zoom. Zoom will do the same thing. If we select zoom and hit auto zoom, it's going to zoom in that footage to fill in those gaps. And I do see this is doing some weird warping on this side over here. This whole wall is warping. But that is another way to stabilize your footage using the planar tracker in Fusion. So that is the planar tracker node and the planar transform node. I will see you in the next node breakdown.